Lion in the Wind. Chapter 6. Slayo looked at the computer screen in front of him and stared with amazement. "Huh, impressive. Did you write all this?" he asked. Bergen shook his head and pointed to a small square in the corner of the screen that represented a section of code. "That's what I wrote. He's written the rest." Slayo did a surprised double take. "Wait, what? He wrote all of that on his own? How's that possible?" he said. Bergen shrugged. "I don't know." Slayo looked at him with curious bemusement. "You wrote his AI and you don't know why he's like this?" "I was asleep when it happened." "Well? What was the last thing you did before you went to sleep?" "I was working on a small part of his core memory logic shell. It was part of this function library here connected to the subsea bus logic block." "Did you get it to work?" "No, it kept crashing. I was using jokes to test his relational skills and all I got were fatal exceptions." Slayo cocked an eyebrow in bemusement. "You were using jokes to help build his AI program?" he said incredulously. "Jokes are a good way for him to learn how to connect previously learned experiences to new input. The problem is, he was unable to do that. So I was trying to write a code correction that would fix that problem, but sleep deprivation got the better of me before I could finish." "So, do you think your work in any way led to what happened here?" Bergen shrugged. "I have no idea. If it was something I did, then I'd like to know what it was and why it happened now and not before. Of course, knowing that might be the fly in the ointment." "Why do you say that?" asked Slayo. "Well, have you looked at his programming? I've written a lot of AI systems over the years, but this is more advanced than anything I've ever seen before. Whatever triggered this self-growth has never happened in the entire history of robotics." "So what do you think we should do now?" asked Slayo. Bergen sat back and thought for several moments. "I think we should let him grow on his own for a while and see how he develops. If he goes down the wrong path, we can easily shut him down, and then make any necessary corrections before trying again. Eventually he should reach a point that we won't have to intervene anymore. Well, I think that, in the grand scheme of things, helping his sentience grow to maturity will be the easy part. Getting society to accept the idea of a sentient android will be a whole lot harder." Bergen sighed. "Yeah. Tell me something I don't already know." Tegani looked at Bergen and asked, "May I go outside to explore?" Bergen looked briefly at Slayo and then back at Tegani. "Actually, that's not a bad idea," he said. He looked back at Slayo and said, "So, do you have a few hours to kill today?" Slayo shrugged. "Sure. What did you have in mind?" "Well, I want to test out a few ideas. Tegani has taken in a lot of data already. So I think it would be good for him to put that knowledge to use by exploring his environment. If nothing else, it'll help his AI develop further." Slayo shrugged. "Sure, sounds good to me." Bergen stood up, unhooked Tegani from the programming terminal, fitted him with an electronic restraint unit, and then led the young lion outside. As Tegani began exploring the world around him, his dusty gray, metallic body glistening in the sun, Bergen and Slayo sat down on a nearby hill and studied him. As they did, Persia walked up to Tegani and watched curiously as he analyzed a large weed in front of him. "What you doing?" she said with a chuckle. "I am exploring the biological and structural makeup of this plant and comparing it with the existing data on this species which is stored in my memory systems," said Tegani. "You sound like you're fascinated by it," said Persia. "I am merely trying to create the most accurate data model possible on each item I encounter. Fascination is not a function of my programming," said Tegani. Persia laughed. "You're funny." Tegani looked at her curiously, and asked, "What is the purpose of this strange activity that you engage in?" Persia screwed up her face in confusion. "What strange activity?" she asked. Tegani mimicked Persia's laugh, and said, "The activity I just demonstrated." She grinned. "That's called laughter, silly." Tegani's eyebrows perked up with interest. "Laughter. The act of laughing." A derivative of the word laugh, which is to express joy or mirth. A spontaneous action used to express happiness or a joyful emotion, he said. Persia nodded. Yeah, something like that. I do not understand the purpose of this emotion. Please explain. Persia stared at Tegani with an expression of confusion. Honestly, I've never really thought about it. I guess we just do it because we're happy. I do not understand. Please elaborate. Persia smirked and narrowed her eyes slightly as she twitched her whiskers pertly. This is going to take a while, isn't it? She quipped. Tegani tilted his head in confusion. What will take a while? Persia laughed. Well, if you're going to learn about laughter, you need to start at the beginning. As Persia went about explaining laughter to Tegani, Slayo watched her with interest. He chuckled slightly when Tegani began diving into deeper and more complex subjects, making Persia's efforts to help him understand more difficult. I see those two are getting along well, he said. Persia has always been curious about him since the beginning. She asked me all kinds of questions while I was building him, said Bergen. I hope it doesn't kill her. Bergen looked at him curiously. Kill her? What? Tegani? I don't think he would. Slayo laughed. No. Her curiosity. You know the saying, curiosity killed the cat? Oh. Right, said Bergen. Slayo shook his head. I would have expected you to catch that little quip right away, he said. Yeah, sorry. I guess it got past me, said Bergen as he continued to watch Persia and Tegani. Slayo cocked an eyebrow. Something on your mind? You're usually not this disconnected unless you're really thinking hard about something. Bergen sighed. I am. Most of it's about how Tegani became sentient. Nothing makes sense. His AI core was nowhere near ready to go live, let alone reach sentience. And yet, here he is, walking around and thinking for himself. It's like a miracle. Almost like the hand of Mashwa touched him, he said. Mashwa? Asked Slayo curiously. Bergen nodded. When I was a child, my mother told me stories of Mashwa, the guardian spirit of our people. He's rumored to have protected our ancestors since ancient times. It's said that when he walks the prairie, great evil is about to descend upon us. But he always protects us, no matter how great the danger may be. Ah, yes. I've heard of him. So what made you think of him all of a sudden? I've been hearing rumors that Mashwa is once again walking the land. He's supposedly been seen both north and west of here, said Bergen. Slayo snorted. Unlikely. Mashwa is just a myth made up by our ancestors, a fable created to explain the ways of nature to a society that had not yet grasped science. Suddenly Slayo's eyes went wide. Wait a second. You're not suggesting that Tegani's sentience has anything to do with Mashwa, are you? Bergen nodded slightly. Slayo frowned. Please tell me you're not serious. I am. I've spent the last 2 years working on Tegani's AI programming and never once did I ever create more than an elementary level of sentience. So I'm still finding it difficult to believe that I just suddenly stumbled onto the right combination of code that just happened to turn Tegani into a fully sentient life form. There's got to be more to this than what we found. Slayo blinked twice and then roared with laughter. You really have been putting in too many hours on this project lately, haven't you? Bergen looked at Slayo with an expression of confusion. Idiots, AI programs don't just suddenly become sentient because some mythological entity from antiquity wished them to be. It takes genius to create intelligence and your genius has created intelligence. You just don't realize it yet, said Slayo. He stood up and patted Bergen on the back. Get some sleep, old man, or next you'll start thinking that Simbits can talk, he chided. He then turned and strode away. Bergen stared after him for a while and then turned back towards Tegani and Persia and watched silently as they continued to talk. Silvers slipped into Delgra's office and handed him a folder. What's this? Asked Delgra. It's the weekly report on all recent upgrades to the facility, as well as a report on the new additions to the troops stationed here, he said. Has our latest group of soldiers arrived yet? Asked Delgra. They're due in any time, sir. Good. And what is the status of the new barracks? They should be completed today. Excellent. What about the other supplies and equipment I requested? Silvers squirmed slightly. We're still having problems getting those. Regional provisioning won't release them to us. Delgra crossed his arms and thought for a moment. Then I guess I'll have to pull some strings to make it happen. Just then a knock came at the door. Come in, said Delgra. The secretary peeked her head into the room and said, I'm sorry to interrupt you, sir, but you wanted to be informed when the new soldiers arrived. Thank you, Ms. Eva, said Delgra. The secretary nodded and then excused herself. Delgra looked over at Silvers and said, Can you check on them for me? I want everyone put to work as soon as they're unpacked. Silvers nodded and replied, I'll get right on it, sir. He then turned and slipped out of the office. Delgra soon returned to his work. But as he was typing a new set of orders, a message appeared on his screen. It read, Cyber requests secure connection. He stopped his work and studied the message. After a moment he clicked the OK button and waited for the message window to appear. Greetings, Major, the message read. How can I be of service? Typed Delgra. I have something I think you might be interested in, came the reply. Delgra saw a small file icon begin flashing in the corner of the message screen. He clicked it, accepted the file, and then waited for it to download. When it had completed, he opened it. It was a picture of a dusty gray, metallic lion. Delgra studied the data sheets included with the image and then blinked when he saw one word stenciled in red at the bottom. Sentient, he thought to himself. Is that even possible? He quickly flipped back to the message window and typed, What is this for? We require a trump card if we are to win the upcoming war. I believe this will adequately suit our needs. In the next few days I will be putting in motion the necessary paperwork to ensure that he is transferred to you, came the reply. I look forward to his arrival, typed Delgra. Black walked gracefully into a simple, yet elegant stateroom and vigorously shook hands with an older man. Mr. Black. It's good to see you as always, said the man. Black nodded as he smiled graciously. Same with you, Senator, he replied. The man motioned to a chair and said, Please, have a seat. Black bowed slightly and then sat down. So, what can I do for you today? Asked the senator. Black's eyes wandered cautiously around the stateroom. Is it safe to talk here? He asked. The senator grinned. Of course it is. I wouldn't conduct my most sensitive business in here if it wasn't. It's my most secure room. I just don't use it all the time. It'd raise too many questions if I did. So I save it for, shall we say, special occasions? Black grinned as he folded his hands contemplatively. Indeed. Well then, shall we get down to business? How concerned are you with the safety of this nation and its people? The senator shrugged. As concerned as any senator should be. Why? Black pulled a folder out of his briefcase and laid it down on the table in front of the senator. Read this. I believe the information inside is of great importance to our national security. The senator turned the folder towards himself, flipped it open and started reading. Black watched in interest as the senator's eyes grew steadily wider as he read. Finally, after several moments, the senator looked up at him in horror. How is this possible? He asked, a hint of shock in his voice. Black grinned slightly. There is something to be said for doing business with the military. You periodically encounter rather interesting information, he said. The senator studied the papers intently as sweat began to bead on his forehead. If they know about this, why haven't they brought it to our attention yet? They disbelieve their own intelligence, and thus have ignored all of the warning signs so far, hoping that this silly nonsense will just go away. The problem is, it will not. The senator wiped his forehead with a small rag. How long have they known? About 2 years. If estimates are right, we have slightly less than 1 year left before the Gorg begin their first strike, said Black. The senator looked at him in shock. That's nowhere near enough time to get ready. Actually, it will be plenty of time, grinned Black. How? You may be surprised at the resourcefulness of some of our military officers. In fact, one of them has already gone out of his way to secretly prepare the military for the upcoming invasion, said Black. He slid another folder across the table to the senator, who eyed it nervously. Black sat back and smiled devilishly. Even though the senator was becoming a nervous wreck, Black was enjoying every minute of it. Open it. What you find may interest you, he said with an almost devilish grin. The senator slowly opened the folder and found pictures of Delgra as he moved about the Echo Military Science Labs on his daily duties. What is this? He asked. An opportunity to save our country and its people. After several moments, the senator looked at Black through narrowed, suspicious eyes. You're part of all this, aren't you? Snapped the senator. Black shrugged. In a way, yes. If you knew about this already, why didn't you say something before now? There is something to be said for correctly timing the release of information to achieve the best possible results. If I had stepped forward earlier, little, if anything, would have happened. That was not something I was willing to risk. So what do we do now? Take this information to the General Secretary and make it sound like it's your handiwork. Tell him you have secret inside sources that have solid intelligence confirming the fact that this upcoming invasion is real. Tell him that, because of this information, you've come to him in hopes that he'll act quickly to prepare the nation for war. He'll see you as a patriotic leader who's deeply concerned for the safety of the country, and an important political asset, which will, in turn, gain the additional power within the Senate you so crave. But if he balks, show him how this can be of a political advantage to him. He's up for re-election this year, so you can use this to help motivate him as well. The senator glanced briefly at the papers and then at Black again. I'm not sure about this. How do I know this will benefit me? Black took a thick envelope out of the pocket of his suit jacket and slid it across the table. I'm sure you can think of something, can't you? He said, grinning slyly. The senator eyed the envelope and then Black. He scooped it up from the table and quickly slipped it into his jacket pocket before gathering up the folders and tucking them into his briefcase. I'll talk to him tomorrow morning and see what I can do. Black grinned with satisfaction. That's all I ask. Persia lay quietly on a hillside behind Bergen's laboratory as the golden rays of the twin suns danced playfully off of thin, wispy cloud tops nearby. She stretched long and hard, rolled over slightly and then laid her head on Bergen's lap. She purred contentedly and then laughed as a butterfly landed on her nose. Tegani sat next to them and carefully studied the sky above as he took notes on everything around him. A small puff of wind blew across his face, causing him to toss his mane gently in order to straighten it. How do you like your new skin? Asked Bergen. The feeling is strange, but the clothing was necessary. Nakedness in our society is shunned. Therefore, having a proper covering is required, replied Tegani. Bergen smiled. How are the sensor points? Are they causing you any discomfort? Tegani shook his head. I don't feel pain or discomfort by your understanding. I am, however, experiencing significant sensor feedback. The alpha data segments appear to be higher in some areas as opposed to others. While not overwhelming, the data flow is significant. Bergen pulled his computer from its bag and set it on his lap. He connected a long cord to it and handed the other end to Tegani. Here, plug this in so I can get a look at what you're seeing. Tegani took the data cable, opened an access port on his chest, and inserted it. Data immediately began appearing on Bergen's computer as it struggled to keep up with the torrent of information. Slowly Bergen isolated one feed at a time and adjusted each of them until the flow became more manageable. Is that better? Asked Bergen. It is acceptable, replied Tegani. He then ejected the data cable, handed it to Bergen, and closed the small access port. Dad, will you get me some more of that Gurak meat? Asked Persia. Bergen chuckled. You eat too much of that stuff already. Besides, I just gave you some yesterday. Persia smiled. I know. But I want more. It was good. If you keep eating that stuff you'll get fat and I'll end up broke, chided Bergen. Persia chuckled, and said playfully, I will not. Bergen laughed. As he and Persia continued to talk, a Grek came into view overhead. At first it only studied the facility with muted interest. But when it saw Tegani, it swooped down to get a better look, and was aghast when it realized what it was looking at. It's the proxy, it said in a squawking voice. It immediately turned and flew away as fast as it could into the open prairie, crying wildly as it went. Tegani looked up and briefly studied the noisy bird, but took no further interest in it. The bird continued to fly with all its might for several miles until it spotted a pack of Vandros hiding in the prairie grass below. The bird rolled out and swooped down at the wolf-like Vandros. The proxy has been found. The proxy has been found, cried the Grek. The Vandros leapt to their feet. Where is this creature? Cried their leader. To the south. To the south, bellowed the Grek as it circled overhead. The lead Vandros barked angrily and folded his ears back as he looked towards a nearby complex of buildings. With me, he cried as he raced across the prairie like an angry smear of midnight.